showtime!
Pretty soon we'll be coming up on the 2-year anniversary of Genshin Impact, and that means we've had quite a lot of version updates since the beginning. I've been around for every single update, only missing a little bit of version 1.0 at the very beginning. But I figured, hey, why not rank them? As usual, this will be highly subjective based on my opinion and how I felt of the updates. For you, my dear little YouTube viewer, you might value story more than I do. I mean, that's almost a guarantee because the story doesn't really matter to me much. So I will be going over why I liked each update and what maybe I didn't like about it. And if it seems like I forgot something, it might just be because it wasn't important to me, which is really just a long way of saying this is my opinion and it probably won't reflect yours. Oh, and by the way, I will not be factoring in characters. I love Ito, but that doesn't make his patch an S. So here we go. Version 1.0, where not everyone started their Genshin Impact adventure, but a lot of players did. I mean, millions did, myself included. And while I'm not really a nostalgic person, that doesn't mean that I don't have extremely fond memories of starting Genshin. I mean, starting an open world game for the first time when you're discovering all the secrets and stuff, that is a lot of fun. It's addicting. I mean, sometimes you explore all day and you feel like you did a lot and you look at the map and you're like, wow, I barely scratched the surface. Other than that, I don't have much to say about version 1.0. I mean, it was the release of the game and I clearly love the game because I decided to eventually make content for it. So I'm not going to put an S, but I think it deserves at least an A rank. Version 1.1. Man, this update gave us quite a bit. For starters, it gave us the reputation system, which gave us a lot of useful gadgets. Some that save us a lot of headache and a lot of struggle. Mostly the Oculus Resonance Stones and the Treasure Compasses. These are amazing tools that help us 100% zones. Like, don't get me wrong, I love exploration, but I don't love combing through a zone for that last 1%, especially when the game doesn't actually really reward us for getting that 100%. But you know, my brain still likes it, so I'm gonna do it anyway. But we have the things that version 1.1 introduced to thank for making that process a little bit easier. The main event, Unreconciled Stars, is probably one of the better events we've ever had in terms of story, gameplay, and rewards. I mean, rewards were debatable because back then, events actually costed resin to do, at least the main ones. I found a picture of the shop we had for this event and just look how insane the rewards were. I'm not really sure if the math ended up in the event's favor. I don't know if it was better just to spend it on ley lines than if it actually spent it on the event, but in any case, I think we can all agree that it's good that the events don't cost resin because it's kind of bad to have a temporary event disrupt your current plan. I think it was a good change. Outside of the event, it was a very story-rich patch. It gave us a conclusion to the Archon quest that we had for Liyue and Mondstadt. What I really liked about this patch, though, was the quality of life. We went from having only 10,000 items in our inventory total to having individual limits for each category, and some of those categories even had their limits increased as well. And on top of condensed resin being released, we also had our resin cap increased from 120 to 160, allowing you to go longer without actually spending it. All things considered, really solid patch. It gave every type of player something to look forward to pretty much, and a lot of quality of life, which is fantastic. And for that, I'm giving it an A. Version 1.2, this is the patch that gave us Dragonspine. And Dragonspine just so happens to be one of my favorite areas in the entire game. Well, I love snow. I mean, I'm Canadian, what can I say? I just can't wait till we get a full region based off this, but aside from that, Dragonspine was a lot of fun. The event around it was really good. It's one of those events that, you know, probably should have stayed in the game in some way or fashion to repeat the story, but oh well. This place also gave us Heart of Depths and Blizzard Strayer, two of the best artifact sets even to this day. I mean, Blizzard Strayer arguably the strongest in the right scenarios. And let me tell you, after dealing with Crimson Witch and Lava Walker for a long time, it was really goddamn nice to see a domain where you actually wanted both artifact sets. I mean, provided if you actually had and wanted child, which a lot of people back then did not, and I think a lot of people still don't. You know, stop the child hate. This is also the patch that introduced the system where you get fates for ascending characters level 20, 50, and 70, which at the time was a huge dump of fates in a lot of players' laps. And we're still getting more fates from this system with every new character to this day. Other than that, I don't have a lot to say. I mean, I love Dragonspine. Obviously, I said it's one of my favorite zones, still is. I loved exploring it. The caves, the snow, it was all so beautiful and fun. I even love the sheer cold. So I'm also going to put this one in A, and I promise this isn't just going to be an A tier party. Version 1.3, also known as the original Lantern Rite. The real highlight of the original Lantern Rite for myself was the Tower Defense, Theater Mechanicus. I'm a huge Tower Defense fan, it's one of my favorite game genres, and even though all things considered, Theater Mechanicus is not a great tower defense, I did still enjoy it. It's also one of the few events that you can do in co-op and have a lot of fun with other players. Lantern Rite was not all sunshine and rainbows for me. I didn't like the Lantern Rite Tales, which involved you doing a lot of little quests for various NPCs around Liyue. It just wasn't for me. That specific part of Lantern Rite went down as one of my least favorite favorite events of all time, and it's since been massively dethroned, but we'll get to that later. Another huge part of this event was the awards. A lot of players consider Lantern Rite to be the real anniversary because of how generous it is or was. One of those rewards being a Liwa 4-star of your choice, which was huge for a lot of players of the choice and would still be now. 1.3 also gave us the Parametric Transformer, which many people still forget to use on a weekly basis to this day, and I think most importantly, we got the Zhongli and Geo buffs, which were huge because Zhongli really did need that buff, and so did Geo as an element, and more importantly, it set the precedent that buffs can happen, which many Amber players still wait for to this day. So all in all, I give this version about a B. Version 1.4, this was the Windbloom Festival, and really, it made Mondstadt pretty. I loved the way it was decorated, and I wish it was like this all year round. However, I'm not sure I have as fond of memories as other players might have. After all, a big aspect of this patch was the Mario Party-like minigames that people played with their friends. So that's why people might have a lot of fond memories of it, but I didn't do that. I just got in, got the rewards, and got out. Now, the minigames themselves, they were fun enough, but I did not feel compelled to do them in co-op. Really, the highlight of this patch for a lot of people was the Venti rerun. We've been waiting for a Venti rerun for so long, and every patch we had leaks of, oh, maybe it's this patch, maybe it's this one. So it was also when we had the first music minigame, I think this was the first introduction of it. I didn't like it at the time. I didn't like that you had to play through easy and then normal and then go to the hardest difficulty. 1.4 was also the introduction of Hangouts, which was really a good way to spotlight a lot of the 4-stars that may not get a lot of screen time in events. We also saw the condensed resin cap go from 3 to 5. The battle pass also started giving us more fragile resin. Not the most exciting version for me comparatively, but something's got to be down here. And D does not mean like awful. It just means I'm trying to balance a tier list, and this would probably be one of my least favorite ones. You get it? Got it? Okay, good. Moving on. Version 1.5. This one was a bit of an interesting one in some ways. For starters, right at the gate, it gave us Age Daha, and while I didn't talk about Child as a weekly boss before, Age Daha had a little bit more fanfare around him if you ask me. 1.5 also gave us a teapot, which built my expectations up massively because I love things like this. I love home building features, but then I saw Low Limit and I wasn't so happy anymore, but it used to be so much worse than it is now, even though it is still awful. This is where we really started to get events that I wish that would just replace the Spiral Abyss, because I love the way you buff up your characters in these type of events. They're a lot of fun to play. We also started to get events that let you basically trial test characters in different team comps, which is really good. That's an excellent tool for newer players. Personally, I think this is where side events really started to hit their stride and really become a lot of fun. But most importantly, this was our first introduction to Windtrace, and Windtrace was a lot of fun, except for one major problem, which was Wu Wong Godforsaken Hill, that stupid map. I mean, Rebels got free wins if they tried even a tiny bit, and Hunters just gave up. We saw new Hangouts get introduced, and on top of that, we also got 2 new artifact sets, the Tenacity to the Millilith and the Pale Flame. This was also where we got the first 3 weekly boss discount for the first 3 bosses you do. Despite how much is here, I still can't justify giving this patch any higher than like a C. Just doesn't quite live up to what I put above it so far. For as much as I love the Teapot and the Windtrace event, they weren't great immediately. Oh, version 1.6. I only need to talk about one thing for this patch. The Golden Apple Archipelago. God, this zone was so fun. This event is by far the best event we've ever gotten. That's not my opinion. That's just a fact. If you think otherwise, I'm sorry, you're wrong. I know a lot of you might not have actually been around to experience it the first time, but it was a lot different than the second time we got it. They basically just slapped a whole new region down and said explore it, have fun, and I did. I really cannot say enough good things about it. It was a really fun event, and I'm sorry if you missed it. I think almost every aspect of the event was fun. Every side event, every little mini game, I enjoyed it all. And really, I don't need to say much more about the patch, but we did get some other things, like this was the patch where a lot of reactions saw buffs, namely Electro and Animo reactions. This is, of course, where skins were introduced for Jean and Barbara, and it's also, not much else happened, but nothing else really needed to happen because the Golden Apple Archipelago was enough. This version was an easy yes. And it was just a fantastic way to end version 1. Version 2.0, the introduction of Inazuma. Weirdly hated by a lot of people. I mean, maybe they had fun at the time, but when I talk to people, it seems like a lot of people didn't like Inazuma. They didn't like exploring it. I, however, thoroughly loved this zone. Sure, some of the puzzles maybe were a little bit annoying, and Electro Steely sure as shit could just slow down a little bit. But regardless, I loved the new scenery. I loved the change of pace, the whole new region to explore. I think this was one of the better patches, and really it's kind of cheating because it's a whole new version update. With that comes a whole new region, a whole onslaught of characters coming. We're in that right now with Sumeru, and it's a fun time. I will say Inazuma didn't quite live up to my expectations of what a region ruled by basically a tyrant god was going to be like, but that's whatever. The events in this version were fun and all, but I really think they were just secondary to a whole new region dropping, except for, Athena Mechanicus came back, and I think it was an improvement over the last time, but it was relegated to more of a minor event, so it didn't feel quite as fleshed out. And of course, with the new region came new prototypes that looked amazing, especially compared to the Mondstadt ones, and we also got 2 new artifact sets with the Emblem domain, which is just one of the best domains we have. So that makes this patch an easy S for me. Version 2.1, this is where we got 2 more regions of Inazuma, Watatsumi Island and Seirai Island, which they were good and I enjoyed them, but I don't think I enjoyed them quite as much as the first 3 islands, maybe because Inazuma was new at the time. I particularly take issue with Watatsumi Island. I love the island, I love the aesthetic, I think it's one of the best looking zones in the entire game, but I really just felt it was hollow. There wasn't a lot there, and by the time I was done exploring it, I was like, really? That was it? Seirai, however, felt fantastic. I did love that zone. I even loved the 50,000 ruin sentinels that lived there. It's also the version that gave us Signora as a boss, which for a lot of you Signora fans, you probably don't like that because she died. But she gave us a weekly boss that's not horrifically annoying like Aishtaha with a bunch of forced invincibility phases, and she's got some nice mechanics. But you know what? Great addition, I approve. On the other hand, it also gave us specters, so it's not all good. This was where I really started to feel like the Inazuma story was rushed. I know a lot of people have opinions about that, but I think it was rushed. So between being underwhelmed with how quickly the story resolved and just how Watatsumi Island felt empty, I didn't exactly, love this patch, but it was a good patch. The events of the version were also fairly fun, but they weren't exactly anything to think about compared to new regions to explore. So with that in mind, I give version 2.1, I'd say like a B. Version 2.2 also gave us a new region in Tsurumi Island, an island that shifts over time and is covered in a mysterious fog, and it was a really fun island to explore. But even more importantly than the new zone, I think, was the event that was going on at the time. The roguelite event, the Labyrinth Warriors. It was a really fun event. It was combat focused, it had rogue mechanics in it, which I love. And I think some people enjoyed the story, but I am gonna be honest, I didn't pay attention to it. It was just one of those events that shows that Hoyoverse knows how to make really enjoyable gameplay, but we're just stuck with the Spiral Abyss and they refuse to change it into something more like an experience like this. But I guess that also just makes these a bit more enjoyable when they actually come around. Rhythm event came back, which isn't really my thing. Even more hangouts. And on top of that, the artifact inventory cap went up to 1,500 from 1,000, which was a much needed change. Really solid patch, and really, I love the artifact limit increase. I wish it went up even more. I would say this one is it's a B, but it's so close to being an A. Version 2.3 takes us back to Dragonspine, and as much as I love Dragonspine and I did enjoy Albedo's story and the continuation of it, I gotta say the gameplay of this event wasn't, well, I barely remember it. I remember like an agility training course and some combat and some other stuff, but I don't remember enjoying it a lot. The whole patch was more or less just me being excited for Ito and nothing else, and that's not to say I ignored everything else for Ito, but he was the highlight of the patch for me, and I'm not judging this based on characters. The minor events were good. They brought back the Energy Amplifier and the Misty Dungeon, and those were both great events, but when they're minor events, there's just not as much to them, If story was more my focus, this patch would definitely be rated higher, but since I'm more gameplay oriented, I give this one a C. 2.4, aka Lantern Rite 2 Electric Boogaloo. As fun as Lantern Rite was, and it was a really good event the second time around, I think it was probably a little bit better than the first Lantern Rite. I think the real focus here was the new region Encanomia. This zone really shook up the conventions of Genshin exploration. We had a lot of new mechanics, a lot of new set pieces, and the fantasy elements were dialed up to 11 out of 10. It had a dark and gloomy atmosphere, but at the same time it also felt very open and fantastical. I think it's one of the best designed regions we've ever gotten, and even though I didn't particularly like the day-night changing mechanic, I felt it kind of tedious. It didn't stop me at all from appreciating and loving the zone. And it also brought back Windtrace, this time with some much needed changes, removing Wulong Hill, thank God, and also balancing the Hunter-Rebel dynamic a little bit. And with that, I give this version an A. So 2.5 gives us what I affectionately refer to as Shadow Encanomia. Now I'll say this, I enjoyed this event, but I didn't actually explore Encanomia fully until probably about halfway through 2.7, like after the chasm dropped. But had I explored Encanomia fully in the patch before, I don't think I would have enjoyed this version as much, and I'm gonna rate it under that assumption. So I think if I had just explored Encanomia and then had to do this event, I would not have enjoyed this event as much. Now that aside, let's talk about the minor events, particularly my my second least favorite event, or least favorite minor event of all, A Drink of Dreaming. I hated this event. The character dialogue and cutscenes were funny enough, but the gameplay was, oh, I couldn't stand it. It's not for me. I know a lot of people love this event, but I very much am not one of those people. Divine Ingenuity was probably a highlight for a lot of people, and as much as I love games like Mario Maker, and I think building your own stages is a lot of fun, I think having this as a minor event that was going to go away was really a disservice to it. I think something like this should stay in the game permanently, where you can always share stages and just comes back in as an event and adds new things, much like I think about Wind Trace. So overall, I can't say extremely positive things about this version. I did like the main event, but again, I wouldn't have enjoyed it as much had I done Encanomia the patch before. So with that in mind, I am giving this one a D, but just a reminder that D doesn't mean horrible, it just means one of my least favorites. F means horrible. We'll get to that later. So 2.6, I can keep this one short and sweet. This was the Chasm. I don't need to talk about anything else about this version because the Chasm is my favorite zone. I think it was one of the best designed zones we've ever gotten up until Sumeru. If you went into it spoiler free like me, you did the surface, and by the time you see your map getting to about 100%, you're like, really? That's it? Somehow, despite promotional material even showing the underground aspect, I forgot or just didn't pay attention. And of course, I go in the underground, I'm like, oh shit, there's like a whole another zone under this zone, and that's where the majority of the Chasm is. Underground is where everything changes for the Chasm. The atmosphere, it's dark and brooding and smothering, and I love it, and everything just feels so meaningful. Like they really took use of the space down there. It doesn't feel like you're trekking through a useless area where nothing is happening. There's always something in sight, and it was just a really good time to explore. Even got one of my favorite biomes in games, which is like a glowing luminescent mushroom area. I love zones like that. And even though I love Chasm enough to give this place the highest rating, I'm going to talk about at least some other thing. Well, one thing, most notably Theater Mechanicus. In my opinion, this was the best version of Theater Mechanicus we've ever had. And I think what made it so much better was the RNG of the fortune stick system. Sometimes you got some really nutty builds and they just took off and murdered everything, and well, that's what makes roguelikes so fun. And that's really all I have to say, because this patch is an easy S for me. 2.7 gave us one of what was probably the most entertaining and fun events to play through, at least in terms of the story and the dialogue. The group of characters that were stuck down in the chasm together were not exactly characters I ever would have thought would have been in a group together, but they were really entertaining to watch. The quest was fun. I can't say I have the fondest memories of the gameplay of this event, though. There were aspects near the end when you're in this domain where you have to deal with some kind of time travel mechanic. Honestly, that's not really a mechanic I typically like in games. The Legend of Zelda Oracle of Ages gave me more than enough of that mechanic than I've had for my entire life. And even though that may have been a small part of that event, I can't say I liked all of it so much as I did the dialogue, which is kind of weird for me to say as a monkey brain dialogue skipper, but that's really just a compliment to how entertaining it was. The story released alongside it was also very entertaining, but honestly, I'm a little bit confused on what was part of the event and what was part of the story because they felt so interconnected. So, I don't know. I'm not going to look it up. I don't really care that much. All I need to know is that I loved it and I enjoyed it. I paid attention to all of it. I read all the dialogue. I watched all the cutscenes. The side events of this update were actually really enjoyable as well, but for once, I don't want to highlight the combat event. I want to highlight the drum event, which was amazing. It was a huge step up from previous ones. Not only could you start on the highest difficulty, but they used the demo music, which is so much better for something like this than the actual music we hear in game, which is amazing, but I'd rather play really upbeat, fast-paced music that they use in the demos. So I would give this version about a B. Version 2.8. Now, if you remember, I told you there was going to be an F, and here we are at the end because I'm not rating Sumeru in this list. So there's no suspense here. I think this is the worst update we've ever had. And before you start typing your comments, no, I was not burnt out on Genshin during this update. I didn't like it because I didn't like the core gameplay of the Golden Apple Archipelago with the different domains for the different characters that had to do with it. I'm sure if you were a person that was really just chomping at the bit for anything story related to do with any of the characters that were involved, that being Mona, Fischl, Kazuha, and Xinyan, you probably loved this event, and I think this event had a lot of redeeming qualities. The set pieces that they created were insane. I couldn't believe they put this much effort into a temporary event. Kazuha's domain was interesting, even though it was a lot of Inazuma tileset things used over and over again. Xinyan's domain looked interesting. Mona and Fischl's domains looked absolutely amazing. Even enjoyed parts of the gameplay of Mona's. Fischl's, I didn't. Kazuha and Xinyan's, I absolutely hated the gameplay of. I couldn't stand playing through them the first time, and having to repeat them for more rewards was an absolutely awful experience. The parts of this update that I didn't like just really ruined the experience of the parts that I should have liked or or do appreciate, even though I didn't like the update. The sad part is I truly think that this event is the one that they have put the most effort into out of every event we've ever had. The dialogue was so fleshed out. The domains were all interesting. They had all kinds of unique assets that they used for this one event. The sad part is I've had trips to the DMV or the dentist that I've looked forward to more than logging in to do this event. I honestly would have been happier if they just reran the Golden Apple Archipelago, just reset it and made us do the exact same thing over again. Sure, it may have not been anything new and fresh, but I really enjoyed the gameplay of the first one. It was just a region to explore. And like I said, this one did have its moments. It's not a patch I hated. I don't look back at it and be like, oh, I wish we just skipped that patch, but it's by far my least favorite one. And I feel like it could have been better with just more interesting gameplay. But yeah, it's an F. Don't even need to say anything else about it. I've said more than enough. I mean, they nerfed specters in this patch. That part was cool. The demo tier list will be coming eventually. I just haven't quite decided how I want to do it yet. People on a poll I posted a little bit ago said they wanted it long, even if it's like 40 minutes plus. I mean, I guess that part's been decided, but I still don't know if I want to like try to how I want to react to it. If I want to pause it a bunch, I don't know. But in any case, feel free to tell me how wrong you think I am about this list, what you enjoyed the most, maybe what patch you started, what patches you've enjoyed since. Big thank you to my patrons as always. You can check out my other socials below. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next one.
Attaboy!